Hello, everybody, and welcome to another one of our podcasts entitled Global Voice of Retail, where CEOs talk to Chris Igwe. My name is Chris Igwe. I'm founder of Chris Igwe International, a boutique retail advisory firm based in Paris. And we continue to explore the different areas of retail and the retail real estate industry as my guests share their insights and knowledge. I'm particularly grateful to ULI Europe, the Urban Land Institute, for their support. And in particular today, it is my great pleasure to introduce someone who I've known for a long, long time and who we've kind of lost direction with, but we got to know each other many, many years ago. So it kind of shows a little bit our age. His name is Morgan Parker. Morgan is in Australia. He is a serial CEO, has worked with many, many large organizations, which I'll go into in a minute. But first of all, welcome, Morgan.
Hi, Chris. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you very much. Yeah, France is
wonderful to be here today.
It's good
on the show.
Good to chat. Good to chat. Thank you very much for joining us. So physically, you are in Australia today and have been for quite some time now. So you've also been in Asia before that. You've lived in 13 different countries around the world, primarily China, Japan, Singapore, and the UAE as well. And what took you back to Australia?
About 3 years ago, I decided that it was time to come back and really focus on being there for my family. My family had sort of followed me around as career opportunities presented themselves as customary. And I really wanted my daughter, who was born in Tokyo and grew up in Hong Kong, she's 100% Australian, to actually experience an Australian education. So we decided to move back and afford her the same childhood that I had. And teach her what it means to be Australian. So I had 22 years overseas, and as you mentioned, a whole bunch of different experiences. So it was sort of time to come back and really pivot to a new lifestyle.
Well, that's great. And the phrase of my wife, similar to yours, rings in my ears, where she one day said to me, you know what, I'm tired of being dragged around Europe. We need to settle somewhere, which is how we ended up in Paris. But that phrase, dragged around, we're very grateful to our wives or partners who support us in those journeys. And clearly you have, and taken the needs of the family seriously, which is great. One thing that I've never actually said this, but given that you're in Australia, and I know we'll come on to some of the things that you've done before, only a handful of people know, but I was involved in a project on Discovery Beach, just north of Brisbane, south of Noosa Head. And an Australian partner and myself had this wild idea of setting up redeveloping the resort. I don't know if it has the same name. So we acquired it, actually. We got the debt financing from an Australian bank, which was fantastic. And then we were getting the equity side from a US company. And it was about to close and going to launch the entire development project when, sadly, 9/11 happened and the equity evaporated, and so did the project. So it was, I got to know that area reasonably well. So that was my experience in Australia. It was going to be so good that the lawyers actually wrote to me and said, you might want to relocate to Australia because this is going to be a huge thing for you and your family. So anyway, well,
I'm quite sure it would have been, Chris, because that area has really developed over the last 20 odd years, and is still a very, very special part of this country today.
All right. Well, sadly, we missed the opportunity, but hey, that's just life. So Morgan, tell us a little bit about what is unusual. I'll come on to your bio in a minute, but something that people don't know about those who know you, but you've learned, acquired a skill, knowledge, unique about you.
Wow.
I do know, I guess I should say for people, that you are a TV host. We'll come on to your real estate and all the other backgrounds, but you are a TV host for National Geographic. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. I had a crazy idea to support charities and ride my bike around the world, and it turned into a television show on National Geographic. And they have been a wonderful support to me in those endeavours. But essentially, I ride my motorbike from around various places around the world and shine a spotlight on grassroots humanitarian organisations that don't really capture anyone's attention, but are doing great work in their local communities. on big sort of global issues that the United Nations considers to be vital for the whole planet. So it's that sort of thinking global, acting local axiom. And it's sort of packaged up as a travel adventure show with a serious message at the core of it. And it's been a great experience for me to get around and meet so many wonderful philanthropists and charity workers around the world who are going about these amazing endeavours without too much fuss, but really changing lives in the process. So the TV show helps them get their message out, helps the audience learn about what they're doing, and raises a few dollars in the process as well.
Well, that's fantastic. Credit to you for doing that. So let's take that as the side that maybe people don't know about, your humanitarian side. If you think of anything even wilder, then please feel free to.
Well, I'm a helicopter pilot. There you go.
Oh, wow.
I decided a few years ago that I wanted to learn how to fly a helicopter. Little did I know that in Australia it involves about 6 months of study and 100 hours of practical training. But yeah, anyway, I started it and I concluded it, and now I'm a licensed helicopter pilot, which I had some strange vision of one day using a helicopter to, as part of my life, and living in a rural area where you could only be accessed by helicopter. So that was the original impetus to do it. Of course, since I got my license, that lifestyle hasn't materialized. Maybe it lies ahead somewhere down the journey of life for me. But it is. Well, when it does happen, I'll have a license to fly.
Exactly. It's like, having a car or having a driving license. Even though you don't have a car, you know how to drive. So one day you'll just be able to do it. So, wow, I'm very impressed. That's cool. Nice.
Yeah, very cool.
So Morgan, just to share with our listeners a little bit about your background. I won't go through your incredible CV. But like I said, you've been CEO and COO. Some of the companies you've passed through or led, the likes of Lend-Lease, Taubman Centers. You're also a banker because you were at Morgan Stanley, and the Dubai holding company. So you were in the UAE as well. So a lot of experience and knowledge in terms of the various aspects, let's say, of developing banking, investing, ownership. And the key in these conversations is really to understand from people like yourself who have led these companies what is going on. So just give us a brief, before we get into the nitty-gritty, give us a brief background in terms of what you have experienced and learned through your different geographical locations, but also in terms of those companies.
Yeah, I set off to Asia in the mid-1990s as a young executive who'd worked here in Australia, actually, where I did my education and where I was brought up. And I started in the real estate space really from a lending perspective, lending to developers and working at an investment bank in Australia called Macquarie. Macquarie had some really inspirational leaders at the time who saw the forthcoming opportunity in Asia. And I took up an opportunity to travel to Asia at the request of our leadership and work on the ground in Indonesia back when President Suharto was still running Indonesia, and there's a lot of business activity, and we referred to a lot of those economies as the tiger economies, if you remember back that far. Mm-hmm. This was really pre the dawning of China, where Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, the Philippines, all these sort of economies were really booming and really moving ahead in real estate, and particularly in shopping centres as well, office buildings, hotels, you name it. So Macquarie wanted to be a part of that, and I said, yeah, I'd love to do that. So it was really as a result of saying yes, I'll move there and I'll give it a go that my career really came out of that one decision. Mm-hmm. And of course, as you spend time in these developing nations, you start to bank a lot of experience, and you start to understand the nuances of the culture, of the way in which business is done, the way in which society operates, and that sort of creates a career competitive advantage, if you like. So I always encourage young people thinking about how can I make a difference and how can I create an opportunity for myself that's different to all the other people that I've gone through university with. And I always encourage them to think about going abroad. and then acquiring knowledge from a different place and from different people, and then bringing that back. And that journey, a round trip journey, took me over 20 years. But I had the opportunity to work at some terrific companies in some markets that were really dynamic and moving at an accelerated pace. So in that, 22 years, I was able to be involved in completing over 60 development projects, which is a really high cadence, and it's reflective of the great organisations that I was lucky to be a part of, but moreover, the cadence of development and investment that was occurring in Asia during those 20 years. Working at places like Morgan Stanley, you get a great understanding of the relationship between the investment side and the real estate side. So yeah, it was a wonderful experience to be a developer, a principal developer of things like shopping centres and office buildings, apartments, hotels, but then also not be the developer and be an investor at different times in my career. My executive career culminated in working for the Prime Minister of the UAE at his company called Dubai Holding, where I was given the opportunity to really bring every bit of experience I've ever accumulated into one role, which is really exciting to work for him as we reimagined how Dubai could go from being this exciting holiday destination to becoming a regional hub of the Middle East. And that transition of a city and a society is more than just the built environment. It's really the social science that sits behind real estate. And as my career has developed, I've really come to appreciate just how important it is for real estate to be reflective of the society that it's serving. And I've also seen the relationship between how the government and the private sector can work together synergistically to create outcomes for the people in those communities. So yeah, it's been great to be in China and Japan and Korea and Hong Kong and those sorts of places as they've gone through these historic transformations.
Great summary of your background and experience, Morgan. So I want to pick up on a couple of, you brought up some really good aspects there. I'd like to break them down. So if I forget in the thought process, please catch them. So the first is cities. The other is public-private partnership relationship. The other is governmental, because you talk about the Prime Minister of Dubai and the whole region, if you like, so that whole urban development within the UAE as an entire region. I know we can't compare whether it's the US or Europe or Asia in a similar way, but just talk us through some of the fundamentals, especially cities today. And you touched on social, which is really important as well. And I like the way you turned the conversation, well, essentially saying that real estate is there to serve a social purpose, or however one wants to describe that. So how can our cities today bring together that value of the individual and where he or she sits within the city? What are the kind of metrics or parameters that you have seen or would suggest are important?
Yeah, look, I think whenever you visit a city in the world, whether it's in a mature developed nation or an emerging market, what you see when you look out your window is a reflection of the society at that time. And so when you go to the Middle East and you see Dubai sitting there in the desert, obviously the natural resources of that part of the world are well known. So you're really trying to, diversify your economy and use a city as a building block for a society. And I think that's been a truism for thousands of years, that cities and people coming together has really been the bedrock of our civilization. And for me now, cities are taking on an even more important role as we see one of the big global megatrends today is this urbanization, where already we have, more than 2 out of 3 people on this planet are living in cities, with that expected to go to 3 out of 4 by the end of this decade. So what that means is that you have a very, very different demand model, if you like, for goods and services infrastructure requirements, transport, utilities than we've seen before. So the demands of cities are going up and up and up. So they have to be better thought out. They have to be highly functional to cope with that increased intensity of demand and densification that you see. So one of the great things that I've been able to observe is how Asia, which is the densest part of our planet, has coped with that urbanization dynamic, and how it's had to lead and use infrastructure and investment in infrastructure to provide the railway tracks, if you like, metaphorically, of how the economy and the society that resides in that city is going to function. And I think that's a real learning for more mature nations, is this idea of having to continue to invest in infrastructure for the future. The places that you and I grew up in, and that Europe, the US, and places like Australia had a century of intense investment in transport infrastructure and utility and public utility infrastructure. But as it would be fair to say that they've sort of rested on that infrastructure for the last X number of decades, and now we're seeing developing nations who have more recently invested in future infrastructure requirements derive the benefits of that investment. So, when I'm looking at cities and their attractiveness, I'm always thinking about how does the city function? What's the sort of the collision coefficient of creating opportunity? People come together for commercial opportunity, social opportunity, romantic opportunity, all sorts of things. That's what brings people together in these places and has done for thousands of years. And ultimately, we are in a world where cities now are actually competing to create that attractiveness, to draw talent, to draw investment in their city, because we've never had a more mobile global population, putting aside COVID, and we've never had a more fungible investment universe where investors are willing and capable of investing anywhere in the world that meets their requirements. So because of that mobility of people and mobility of capital, you've now got cities that are having to compete. And I think one of the key metrics they compete on is their attractiveness in terms of talent. And what that goes to is the sort of lifestyle that you can create for talent, the leisure environment. It's why we see Silicon Valley attracting so many young, bright people from all over the world. Companies like Google and Facebook and those are the new McKinseys and Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanleys of yesteryear. People are drawn to the opportunity of living in a place that satisfies all of their needs. And that is beyond just the workplace per se.
And I think one of the maybe one of the bridges, in fact, is, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, is life sciences and the life science sector as far as it connects with real estate. So where you've got companies looking to develop universities, colleges, research institutions, so everything that sort of is to progress life in some shape or form is also being seen more and more as an asset class, which is not solely what we're going to talk about today, but it's that area. And I think that's an important aspect of this connection or connectivity between real estate and the social fabric that we want to create. So to that point, where do you see the meeting points of real estate adding value to life and life adding value to real estate, if I can put it that way? Is it through the talent?
Yeah.
Is it through the individuals? Yeah,
that's absolutely true. And when you're in markets which are supply-led with real estate, like Dubai is, the type of real estate, the typologies of real estate and the sequencing of real estate development is very important for creating the environment that will then derive a societal outcome. And it's the same, it's a little bit different to China, where you've got vast numbers of people and you're trying to organise a society and organise a built environment in the cities to satisfy and organise those people in a particular way. But, if I can think about the 4 or 5 opportunities I've had in my career to build a new city from scratch, which is really unique that I've been at the right place at the right time to build a new city in Korea, a new city in China, a new city district in Dubai, and indeed a new city district right here in Australia that I've been working on for the last 7 years. And at the heart of each one of those projects has been this idea of creating vitality and economic resiliency. Vitality comes through attracting people who are working and shopping and living and staying and visiting. It's all this sort of kaleidoscope of people and users that are going to create that 24/7 dynamicism that in turn creates the economic resiliency. So we're really, as a society and as cities now, moving well beyond this idea of single-use real estate. Single-use real estate, to me, is not optimization. It's not sweating the asset. If you have just a single office building, well, of course, before 8 o'clock in the morning and after, say, 6 o'clock at night, that asset goes dark. And same for a shopping centre outside of trading hours. And the reverse for a residential project, of course, lively when people are at home and otherwise not. So what you start to see is the importance of real estate creating a 365-day-a-year, 24/7 vitality, and in doing so create predictability around utilisation and therefore investment returns. So when you have a blank canvas to create a new city district, you sit there and go, wow, it sounds really easy. It's not. You have to actually weave in the modalities of transport. How are people going to move? How far are people willing to walk? How far are they willing to cycle? How do we move trucks and vehicles and servicing and loading through these urban spaces? But what stands out more than anything is the importance of facilitating a life of a person. And if you put people first in all of your thinking, whether you're doing an office building or a shopping centre or an apartment complex, if you put people at the centre of your thinking, it really stands you in good stead. So when we're thinking about cities, I think that often gets lost because of the magnitude of the challenge of organising infrastructure and transport and all the rest of it. So I try and adopt that people first mentality when we're planning. And I love creating synergies between different usages to create optimization. So this to me is really the future of where we're going. And ironically, the sort of Western world has single-use approach to life. The Asian nations, if I can sort of generalize in that fashion, because of the scarcity of land and because of density, have tended straight off the bat to be more mixed use in nature. So in a strange twist of fate in my time, in my career, where I went to Asia and was able to contribute new knowledge to them, I came back from Asia actually being able to contribute knowledge in my home nation because places like Australia are still coming to terms with this idea of getting more out of the land and getting more out of this mixed-use dynamic to create better outcomes for people.
Well, I just want to pick up on a couple of things there. So firstly, would it be fair to say that mixed use, which we use as a pretty much generic term now, is the way to go? Because there are still some skeptics who sort of say, well, that's great, but what happens from an asset point of view, an investment point of view? Yeah, we might put offices, residential, retail, and maybe leisure together. But what happens if we have a down cycle in one of those areas? So let's say offices, for example, and the office market crashes. What happens there? Does that imbalance, does that create an imbalance in that particular asset, assuming, of course, the asset is owned by one investor? What are your comments to that? You still think the benefits outweigh the negatives in a mixed-use project?
Yeah, look, there's a lot in that, and it's dangerous to oversimplify it. And obviously, there are horses for courses depending on where you are in the world and what the situation is. But generally speaking, I think one of the other big global megatrends, which is this technological progress and the innovation that we're experiencing, the disruption of technology, one of the implications of that on real estate has been this idea of real estate needing to have optionality in the future. the notion of sort of building a building and it's staying the same for 50 years seems unfathomable in a world which is so dynamic now, where the apps on our phone change one year to the next. Some will remain, but others go, new ones come in. So I liken a city district to an operating system, and the buildings that go onto a city district as the apps, like on your phone. They're all laid out. Imagine a city plan. And the buildings need to be able to be repurposed. So I think the future is to think about how do we construct buildings, design buildings in a way where they can be optimized and repurposed over a period of time that creates sustainable outcomes and allows those buildings to serve different needs at different times. Of course, the other approach would be the sort of disposable building approach, the Zara approach, I guess, disposable fashion, right? And that would be to say, let's build buildings that have a shorter lifespan so that we have the option of taking them down and rebuilding them when a higher and better use exists. Now, of course, that could be done if it could be done sustainably and responsibly from an environmental point of view. That would be another way to go. But what I'm seeing more of is the need for buildings to have that flexibility and complexes to have the flexibility to change and evolve. And if we can think about that at the beginning, then we can create options for investors and owners down the track. Now, of course, the other argument against mixed use is that the investment universe has historically been pure play investors. I want to invest in a shopping centre. I want to invest in an office building, for example. I think that notion is out of date. It's a legacy issue of the way in which real estate was configured for decades. The reality is investors want to be exposed to real estate that's productive and successful and in demand. So if the consumer is demanding a different configuration of uses to create convenience and value and synergy for them, then the investment universe will follow, because it'll be those assets that are most in demand. Now, my observation of mixed-use precincts and mixed-use buildings is that they tend to be successful. And they have, you think about Pacific Place in Hong Kong, developed by Swire. That's a 40, 50-year-old asset now, 3 hotels, 2 office buildings and a shopping centre below. It's got it all. It's like a little mini city. It's got a train station coming in. It's really a blueprint for how you can create highly functional, highly accessible and highly productive real estate that's durable. It's durable because it's got different drivers of footfall, different drivers of demand, and at a scale, it becomes its own critical mass that can be self-sustaining. So I'd much prefer, if I was an investor, to be exposing myself to things that had more than one string to the bow than something that was quite static, quite of its date, and therefore limited in the ability to optimize it and create options in the future.
Great, thanks. Let's segue into retail, which is obviously the heart of not only life, to create that social environment, people going out, eating, drinking, relaxing, chilling, shopping, everything else. And assuming that we all accept that internet is not going to completely destroy retail, what is your perspective, Morgan, on retail as a key driver for growth and sustainable growth going forward? And perhaps you can link that back into any of your experiences through the pandemic, whether through Asia or UAE or indeed Australia. What is the significance and importance of retail today as you see it?
I think retail real estate takes on different roles in societies depending where you are in the world. It can be, from a consumer's point of view, a shopping precinct or shopping centre in Asia is a civic space. It performs a role well and truly beyond that of a transactional environment, a transactional venue between a retailer and a consumer. These are places of business. They are places of opportunity. They are places of respite. They're controlled climatic environments, which make them attractive in some parts of the world. Just to be in a shopping centre and in the environment fulfills a role. Let's not forget that shopping is the number one leisure activity of humanity.
Yeah.
This is often forgotten when we get into the discussion about online shopping versus shopping centres or physical environments. The act of shopping itself, whether you buy anything or not, is indeed a leisure activity. So I think that in a lot of places in the world, the local shopping venue for a person is as important as any other building that they experience in society. For some people, the local shopping centre is more important to them than their Parliament House, than their museum, their art gallery. It might be equal to their place of worship. That's how vital these buildings and these places are, these opportunities for social interaction, meeting friends, having a meal. They are vital cogs in the built environment for our humanity. And it's not a geographic or a cultural thing. It's a human thing. It's a human thing for thousands of years to come together and trade. And yes, these places evolve as they've done for hundreds of years. And yes, they'll continue to need to evolve with the trends that are out there in the world today. But as a driver of economic activity, retail really is fundamental. And of course, it is also a huge employer of vast segments of the global population who are engaged in retail activities. From a retailer's, so that's all consumer perspective. From a retailer's perspective, I think shopping centres continue to be a crucial element of their brand identity and an opportunity for them to present their goods and services in a direct way to the consumer, in a tangible physical environment where they can really express themselves through the visual merchandising, through the volume of the space, the style of the service professionals in the stores. So from a retailer's perspective, having a store, even if it is a showroom type store as opposed to a high transaction environment, is something that is vitally important for their business. And finally, from an investor's perspective, retail real estate is really a unique opportunity for an investor to get a hedge on the consumption economy. Because if you understand the way shopping centres are monetized, ultimately the owner of a shopping centre is a partner, if you like, in all of the retail stores through the way the rent structures work. So as an owner of a shopping centre, you have a fairly rare opportunity to get financial exposure to a broad cross-section of goods and services in the economy. And it'd be very, very difficult through one play to be able to get that sort of diversity of risk and get a natural hedge on our propensity to consume or in our need to consume. So I think they're very, very important assets in the whole spectrum of the investment universe.
Great explanation. I can see that you teach and lecture as well, so you kind of break things down into a very, very clear manner. So thank you for taking us through that journey, Morgan. Let's just stay with the investor for a minute. So I hear what you say, and I agree. But then an investor says, look, I've been in real estate all this time. I hear what you say about retail, the consumer, etc. But how do I know what my returns are going to be in 5, 10, 15, 20 years time? I know, again, it's a complex question because everybody has a different investment strategy or horizon. But if we think pre-pandemic, pre-COVID, the view today is, well, I'm not sure. I don't understand the consumer. From an investor's point of view, they might say, I don't understand this consumer thing. I don't understand the impact of internet. Is Amazon going to kill everything? So how do I manage that risk? Or should I just leave it in there, 20-year long-term investment, and I'll be fine? How can you, putting your investment hat, assist them to, especially bearing in mind, not being specific about age, but maybe some of these investment thoughts are younger generations, so generationally, maybe they're people who don't have the real estate asset experience that people like you have had over several decades. How would you approach helping them understand how to answer the question?
Yeah, look, as you and I both know, Chris, the emergence of e-commerce or online shopping has been something we've been talking about at conferences for over 20 years. And it always amazed people in the business how much attention was applied to that external threat when global retail sales have been so small online. Now, of course, COVID has supercharged online shopping, and we've probably had 10 years of online shopping growth in retail sales in the space of the last 18 months.
Right.
So it's been like time traveling to the future. Here we are, but still, online sales represent a minority, a significant minority of total retail sales around the world. Now, people would suggest that provides an opportunity for more growth. Undoubtedly, it does, as that the logistics and delivery mechanisms improve behind the scenes to get your goods to you quicker. The attractiveness of that online shopping experience will be further enhanced as people become more comfortable with their private information, their credit cards and so forth being online, which we've seen people being very skeptical about that, now cross that bridge and they get comfortable with it. It's sort of a trade-off, isn't it? The convenience that we have from engaging in online shopping versus the sort of loss of privacy associated with it. But little by little, the human race is becoming acclimatized to that environment that we now are in. So where does the shopping centre fit in all of that? I think, I come back to, from an investor's point of view, the sort of enduring quality of humans wanting to interact with other humans. And I just can't see a scenario where looking at a screen, making a purchase is going to usurp all of the more visceral and sensory satisfaction that comes from being in the company of other human beings. So if we're at a point where shopping centres fail because that's the most prevalent human behaviour, then we have much bigger issues with humanity than the loss of shopping centres. Because we have gone, down a path somewhere near the Matrix, if that's the case, and that's quite scary. So, look, I believe that the investor should be demanding of their manager. To answer your question, I think the investor should be demanding of their manager a strategy of how your portfolio of retail real estate assets is going to respond to this omni-channel environment that retailers are utilising now to connect with customers. And if they don't have an answer for that, then you need to get out of there because every respectable retail real estate manager needs to be thinking about their portfolio in the most critical terms. If there are underperforming assets, they need to be recycled, meaning sold, or redeveloped in entirety. Because what we know is when you have the emergence of another channel for in online shopping, that assets that have any vulnerabilities, whether it's not enough car parking, an uninteresting retail mix, or a poor location, the so-called D, C, and B assets, they will be punished first. There's a flight to quality. Retailers keep their best stores and then they discard their lower performing stores. So if your manager or your investment has those sorts of assets, then the writing is on the wall. That the highest and best use of that land and those assets is likely going to change. So you want to be ahead of that and thinking about it. If we switch gears to the better performing assets, I think it's still imperative that an investor demands of their manager a strategy of how they're going to continue to weather this competitive threat from online. And I think the answer there is looking at an asset in its components, identifying those that are more productive, more successful aspects of the experience, what are the fundamental things that we've got going for us? Maybe it's a link to public transport. Maybe it's an amazing car parking facility. Maybe, it's some architectural merit. It could be the mix, but of course we know mix can change. And actually identifying those areas to build on and double down on those, and really focus on the experiential elements. Now, a lot of people talk about the experience and more F&B, more entertainment to differentiate from the online experience. All of those ideas are valid. What I think, though, is that you need to be looking at the components of the real estate, the actual hardware, and saying, where can we change things up here? Is there an opportunity, like in an American mall, to take a footprint of a department store and excise that out and put a residential tower in that spot? Can these sort of development proposals be worked through with local authorities to intensify the attributes of transport links, car parking, and get more out of the asset? The future for me of shopping centres is becoming like little mixed-use cities, where instead of having a dumbbell of a department store and a department store, maybe there's an office building and a residential tower connected by a strip of shops, to use the old US dumbbell format. In doing so, you're really optimising those underlying attributes of the location. Most bigger shopping centres have great transport links, great road and maybe bus and rail. And they're places that people can conceivably live and work in the future. And in doing so, we actually start to see 1 + 1 = 3. And I would bet that if you go through most of the responsible managers around the world, there are people right now working on those sorts of scenario planning exercises across their portfolios, deciding which assets can be repurposed, where we can add more density, change it up, create new income streams, create monetisation events, and in doing so, turn what was a simple retail real estate play for the last 30, 40 years into something that's different now.
Great explanations. We're going to wrap up with one final question, Morgan, which, given that you and I have had a long and continued long background with trade associations and conferences, you speak a lot, I speak a lot, and we've seen things come and go. And one of the commonalities between the two of us is ICSC. I was at the ICSC European Research Group, and I know you were chair, and I think you were also on the ICSC Asia board, so chair of ICSC over in the research group. So given this world of competition, our time is limited as professionals. We have a younger population, if you like, coming into the industry over the past 20 years, let's say, who see the world differently. You've talked about apps and digital and technology, and maybe there's a different form of learning. And I'm a strong member of ULI, Urban Land Institute. I'm a global governing trustee and play a very active role within it. I see a lot of sectors, countries around Europe in particular, but also in other countries, where trade associations are trying to find their identity or redefine themselves. What's your perspective of that in terms of where the challenges are and indeed the opportunities? Will we see trade associations eventually disintegrate and evaporate?
Yeah, look, I guess conferences and trade associations were a segment of commerce that was ripe for disruption. COVID's given us a little peek into what that might look like in the future, where a lot of these sort of associations and the events that they stage have been forced into hybrid or virtual structures. The jury's out on whether those experiences are fulfilling as going to a conference. Some may say, wow, it was really convenient. I didn't even have to leave my bedroom. Other people will lament the fact that they didn't get to catch up with an old friend like Chris at such an event. I think that it's a real challenge for these trade associations to remain relevant and remain fresh, particularly in a world where access to knowledge and information has been accelerated, and the playing field has been leveled so much with access to information. Many, many years ago, unless you were the actual owner or developer of an asset, you would know what was going on. These trade associations information out and provided it to their membership, and in doing so created a proprietary edge and a value proposition of being a member. That's been eroded, of course, as the world becomes more transparent and access to information becomes so much more readily available. So look, I think that again, it's like the shopping centre itself. The trade associations need to zero in on those elements of our society and our being that are truly enduring, and that is that idea of face-to-face communication, the coming together, the relationships. If you continue to be anchored in an education, product display, and speaker-based program, I think you're going to run into challenges. If we go through those, education, that's already been disrupted. There are literally tens of millions of students around the world being educated online. Number two, product. You used to walk around trade shows and look at different products. Yeah, that's interesting. You can touch them and feel them and talk to an expert about them. A lot of that can be done online now to find out that information. And you've got the power of comparing online, and it's more efficient, arguably. And then the third one of listening to a speaker in a big hall at a conference, at a trade show. Well, we're having a podcast right now. So, if you're really interested in a topic and you want to hear from someone in that space, then if you're resourceful, you can find that anytime you want throughout the year.
Right.
So what's left for the trade association to do, particularly when you've got a new bunch of people coming along that have these fluid expectations that everything's going to be here and now, delivered to the palm of their hand? Look, one of the aspects that excites me is data and research. One of the things that's continued to excite me about trade organisations is that they focus on things and knowledge that can't easily be acquired by individual members.
Right.
So individual members don't necessarily have the data set or the financial wherewithal to conduct data or create data series of long history and broad collection. So I think these organisations need to find a way of continuing to provide that proprietary advantage by being a member, by focusing on data, research across a broad interesting array of topics that cause the member not to have to do that themselves, but instead acquire that knowledge through their membership of the organisation. I don't think the idea of coming together and chatting and experiencing each other's knowledge and takeaways is going to disappear. Trade organisations will need to continue to focus on events that bring people together and probably move away from some of the things that they thought were important, going forward. So I don't envy those people in those places. Look, I've seen being in Asia when it was a really nascent market, particularly the shopping centre industry, and seeing groups come in there, and the listed real estate space as well, the REIT universe, and seeing the profound contribution that global trade organisations made in those emerging markets when they really needed that structure and that sort of institutional knowledge so that they didn't make all the mistakes that we'd made and they were able to have a really efficient growth curve. I don't think a lot of the environments, the REIT market of Singapore, I'm thinking Japan, Korea, and the sort of the shopping centre environment in Asia generally, I don't think those industries would have been able to become so sophisticated so quickly if it weren't for the framework that a lot of these trade organisations have provided.
Yeah,
so they just have to rethink it now.
Yeah, I agree with you totally. I mean, there's a lot of repositioning, understanding what the value is you provide, and maybe it's a bit like you said with a blank sheet of paper, looking at a new city. How do you thinking from the consumer's point of view, from the individual's point of view, and maybe that's what we need to go back to our grassroots is what do we actually need, and as opposed to us who've been around in the industry for a long time saying here's what we think we need, maybe let's get those who are actually in that process,
Yeah.
and get them to provide us with what they need, which is not necessarily.
Yeah, we're probably the worst guys to ask what they need.
Well, for me, it's definitely the cocktails and conference dinners as speakers. I'm sure you remember all of those, where you got these private
Indeed.
dinners and very lavish in these, in the ICSC days, these amazing places you'd have your conference dinner and so on. So yeah, but equally, you can go to a really nice restaurant in your own city or some other city and enjoy it with a few friends as well. So, well, great insights, and thank you so much, Morgan. Like anything, time runs out really quickly. It's been absolutely a pleasure to chat with you and do this round the world tour, both from a macro and more of a micro point of view as well. So thank you so much for sharing, and I look forward to staying in touch and B, catching up with you very soon. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris. I really enjoyed it. All the best.
Yeah, you too. Take care. Thanks, Morgan.